Hey, Timothy. Hey, are you there? The speaker's in the house, and I am not going to waste time. So, do you want to pray for us? Welcome, everybody, and we let the speaker start.
Okay, I'll go ahead and pray. Father, we thank you for this wonderful session that we have right now. We thank you for everybody that has made it here already, and those who are joining us, Father, may you quicken their steps, may you quicken every activity they are doing right now so that they can join us and learn from our wonderful speaker. May you use our speaker today to touch our hearts and to heal our hearts, Father. Let us find healing in the session today. In the name of Jesus, I've prayed. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Yes, Peter, I would let you share the screen. So let's give people a few minutes. I don't know if you want to be on camera or if you're going to be off camera. Oh, that's hello.
I can be on camera. Hello, Judith. Good to see you.
How are you doing? Good to see you after so many years.
Too many. It's great to be together again.
Yes, and you have not changed one bit.
I think that must be a filter on Zoom. We definitely have more gray hair for sure than the last time we were together. But
we like filters. We like filters. I need to learn to use them. So I'm trying to give you enough time, but I'm also trying to make sure people are not keeping African time and are going to miss out. So I am going to let you go. We are recording. Others will have to catch up with the recording. But it is so good to have you. I've told everybody you're going to like Peter. There is no way you can't like Peter. So.
No.
And please go everywhere you want to go. We are just glad that you'll be with us. And there are people from Rwanda on the chat. So if you want shortwave for them and add a little bit of Kinyarwanda, I think they will appreciate it. I've told him he speaks good Kinyarwanda, so don't worry. But it is so good to have you. So Peter, I will let you go. And if I give you sharing powers, it means you have to let people in. I don't know if you can do both. Are you able to admit people?
I'm able to do both. I will do my best.
I think you will pass the exam. I think you will. So let me give you the powers. So you are the host in a minute.
Great.
Yep.
All right. And Judith, what do you think? Should we get going here?
I think so. I feel bad for those who will be late, but let's go.
All right.
Let's go. You have 1 hour and 15 minutes.
Okay.
So
wonderful. And Judith, you said it's so nshobora kuvuga Kinyarwanda nta kibazo niba
nta kibazo Dora araza kubasobanurira na Pastor Peter n'abandi bose.
Ndishimye cyane kuba hano uyu munsi mu mutima wanje turi umwe. So it is great to be here, Judith, and everyone that I have not had the privilege of connecting with yet. It is an absolute joy to be together. And one of the things that I have been thinking about is this concept of what does it look like for us to be people that live into a posture of open-handed collaboration and generosity. What would that look like if that were the way that we were to live and serve? So that's what I want to talk about. And just as Judith shared, I'm going to give some opening thoughts, some opening remarks, but I'm hoping that this is an interactive time. I'm hoping that this is an opportunity for us to connect together. And so hopefully either on the chat or in other ways, it would just be great to have this as an active participation. But the first thing that I wanted to do is I just want to start with a little bit of definition. We're going to be talking about rooting for rivals. So rival meaning this person or organization that we are in competition with, the idea of a rivalry. And so what I'd love to see is in the chat roll, if you're able, but when you think about the great rivalries, what comes to mind when you think about a rivalry? What comes to mind for you? I'm going to share what comes to mind for me, but I would love to hear from you. What is it when you think about a rivalry? What comes to mind?
Mm.
And Judith, because you're here, I'm going to be looking at you. Yes, competitor. Yeah, the flesh. Yeah,
Mhm.
good, good. What else comes to mind? War. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that is the ultimate rivalry, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, a few more. Yeah, someone who doesn't wish me well. Yes, yes. Yeah, an enemy. Yeah, thank you. Good. Couple more. What else comes to mind when you think about a rivalry? You know, I'm impressed with all of your answers. Can I tell you what comes to mind for me when I think about rivalries? I go a little bit different direction, but I grew up playing soccer and lacrosse and basketball. And my mind initially goes to those great sports rivalries. So in the United States, I grew up on the East Coast, and there were two basketball teams that would play in the finals, it felt like every year. But I was from Boston, and it always seemed like it was the East Coast versus the West Coast, the Boston Celtics versus the Los Angeles Lakers. And even today, it's baseball season. So I think about the team that is there. That is the Boston Red Sox. And I can't help but feeling, I'm embarrassed to say this, but almost a little joy when the rival team, the New York Yankees, when they end up losing on that. So I think about that, and we know this even with the on the continent and some of the great rivalries that there are on the sports field. And every year it seems like there are these great rivalries, and it's fun to cheer them on, and it's fun to watch our team compete. And what do? We typically wear our jersey, and we know that individuals are now going from our team to another team as well. There are great rivalries, but maybe I'm thinking about this as well because my daughter plays soccer and her first soccer game is tomorrow night, and I can't wait. I can't wait to cheer on my daughter's team as she now is able to be on the pitch as well. So when I think about these rivalries, the craziest thing though is when I started in the work of international development, I joined an organization called World Relief, and I started in Cambodia, and then I moved to Rwanda. And while I was in both of those places, and then I served in Zimbabwe, and now I serve in a variety of different contexts. But when I was with World Relief, the question that I got more than any other was, hey, Peter, tell me how you're different from World Vision. Now, what's a way to reframe that question? Instead of saying, how are you different from this other nonprofit? What's another way that you could interpret that question? What's another way that you could interpret that question of how are you different? You know, for me, if I'm not careful, the way that I interpreted that was, it's almost like we see in the chat roll. Tell me who's better. Tell me why your model, tell me why your mission, tell me why your approach is better. And oftentimes it's compared to those people that are closest to us. Oftentimes it's not someone who's so far, who's so different. Oftentimes it's those that are closest to us that we tend to feel this issue of competition with. And so it wasn't just in that time, it wasn't just there, but it also in the current role that I have. I now joined an organization called Hope International, and we're still asked, how are you different from Opportunity International or Vision Fund or Partners Worldwide? It's something that is deeply wired within us to want to articulate there is us and there is them. And anytime we articulate us versus them, the question that we start to ask is as a question of posturing. How am I bigger? How am I better? How am I more innovative? How am I stacked up to the way that I define my competition? And in the United States, the craziest thing too is that it happens with churches. It happens even with churches. In fact, I had a friend who told me, he said, Peter, you're not going to believe this, but I saw an advertisement in a local newspaper. And the question that it said was an advertisement. It said, is your church boring? Well, then come check out our church. And it was crazy that you would try to share the message of your church by subtly or not so subtly tearing down someone else. Now, what I believe is this exists in all of us. This exists in all of us. This idea that there are rivalries, that there's something in us that feels competitive with others. And again, oftentimes it's with those that are closest. You know, we open up scripture and we find that in the opening pages of scripture, there is a rivalry. It's one of the first rivalries, but we know this, Cain and Abel, siblings, and yet they felt competitive. Who's going to bring the right sacrifice? And there was a sibling rivalry that led to a murder. And that storyline has continued. Mark Twain writes this, he says, comparison is the death of joy. So you want to have no joy in your ministry? Judith, you want to have no joy in the work you do? Constantly be comparing yourself to others. Constantly be comparing yourself to other groups, to other churches, to other nonprofits, to other approaches, and you will take away all joy in the work that you are doing. But Jesus says it even more strongly. It's not just that it takes away joy, it's that it attacks the very foundation that we have. When Jesus was talking, he said this, he said, every kingdom divided against itself will be brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself will not stand. You want to know how to attack the credibility of the church? You go to the root and you sow seeds of division. You want to know how to destroy an organization? You go and you create rivalry and competition. You want to know how to destroy a family? Create a rivalry, create competition within that. It attacks the very root of organizations and families as well. And so this is something that is hardwired in us. It's something that we see in the opening pages of scripture. It's something that we know that exists. And I've been thinking about this question about, well, what's the opposite? What's the opposite? And I like how Kara Powell says this. She said, if we're going to see exponential transformation, we have to work together. So just as seeds of competition, rivalry, and they attack, what would happen if we actually had the opposite? If we had the opportunity to say, we're done with competition. We're done with that. We're done with feeling competitive with others. And instead, we're going to see that we are in this work together. And I believe Kara is absolutely right. That sort of an approach would have an exponential impact if we would figure out what that looks like to do that together. So then I want to ask a question, and I'd love to see the chat roll, or feel free to come off mute. But if that is true, what is it that keeps us from collaboration? If you buy that there's something in us that just makes it a little bit hard to figure out how to have those relationships, how to be in partnership, how to have creative collaboration, what is it that is the obstacle? What is it that makes this so difficult? So love to see in the chat roll, or come off mute. I'd love to see what that looks like. What is it that you would say is at the root of that spirit of competition instead of collaboration? What is it, the spirit of rivalry? Thanks, Innocent. Selfishness hinders the spirit of collaboration. Good. Feeling that we're not good enough. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, fear. Yeah. Good. What else? What else hinders our ability to be in partnership, collaboration with others? Those are good answers. I'd love to hear a few more. What is it? Pride. We know it all. Yeah, we don't have anything to learn from others. We don't need to do it. Feeling superiority, that you're better than others. Yeah. Envy. Yeah, good. Thank you. That's a good list. So I can tell you that I was reading John 17, and in this, it is the final prayer that Jesus prays before the night that he goes to the cross. And in this prayer, Jesus prays that there would be a picture of unity among his followers. And he says this, he prays that we would be brought to complete unity. And yet I know my heart, and I am not there yet. I am not at that spot. And so I started researching this, and Judith knows this, but I kind of love the writing process. I love learning, and it's a way within my leadership of hope to try and go deep. And one of the things that we do typically is we try to find great leaders that are further along on the journey than we are, and to say, what can we learn from them? What can we learn together? And so we started reaching out to the most open-handed, generous, collaborative, kingdom-minded leaders that we knew of. And as we did that, we found the incredible surprise, to our great delight, is that there were common themes. There were themes that cut across geography, they cut across sector, they cut across industry, but we kept hearing these themes again and again and again. And you came up with a great list of what stops us from being open-handed and generous and collaborative leaders. And I want to share two things, and then I want to give some case studies of where we're seeing this. But I want to share what we found were the two most important issues about whether or not an organization, whether or not leaders would be able to have a spirit of collaboration, partnership, and generosity. And the first is this question: do we believe that we live in a world of scarcity or abundance? Do we believe that there's enough, or do we believe that we are really having to fight over our piece of a very limited pie in that? And this question, it's a worldview question. It has very real world implications about whether or not we're able to be collaborative, and whether we're able to go beyond rivalry, beyond competition, beyond envy, beyond jealousy. But in this question, there's an individual who is an entrepreneur in the US. And this is an individual who is known as the founder of McDonald's. And his name is Ray Kroc. And Ray Kroc believed in a world of scarcity, meaning that he did not think there was ever room for anyone else. It was only, the world was only big enough for one restaurant chain, and it was McDonald's. And he famously said this. He famously said, if any of my competitors were drowning, I'd stick a hose in their mouth and turn on the water. This is rat eat rat, dog eat dog. You're talking about the American way, survival of the fittest. Now, that is a crazy statement. And if that is the American way, I need to apologize for the rest of the world. That is a crazy view, but it's a view that is based in a worldview of scarcity. And it's interesting that Ray Kroc was actually not the founder of McDonald's. There were two individuals who were the McDonald's brothers, and they actually were the true founders of McDonald's. But after getting into a partnership with Ray Kroc eventually bought them out. And then immediately afterwards, he set up a restaurant right next to their one store that they had left, and drove them out of business because he said there's not enough room for all of us. He subscribed to a worldview of scarcity. Now, maybe you're thinking, but that's in the for-profit world. That's a little bit different. But is it possible that we can also slip into a worldview of scarcity, even among the other enterprises, even our churches, even the nonprofit space as well? And not long ago, there was a devotional that we put out from Hope International. And it was built around Exodus 4:2 and this question that God asked Moses about what's in your hands. And I was so excited to share this devotional with others. And so we sent it out, and Arissa Mutabazi, who's our African savings group leader, was the one who shared this devotional. And it really was about how oftentimes God does the miraculous with what he's already entrusted to us. And so we were excited to share this message. But the first call that I got was from another nonprofit leader the same day that this went out to our mailing list. And the other nonprofit leader said this, and they left a message, which was helpful, so I could listen to it, make sure that I was hearing it correctly. But they said, Peter, you need to stop with that devotional. And the reason that they shared was because they had filed for a trademark on Exodus 4:2. So they had filed a copyright protection on the words that God spoke to Moses. And when you actually unpack that, why would someone try to trademark the Bible? Why would someone try to do this? And I think the answer is, if you believe that there's not enough for everyone, then you do everything possible for you to be successful no matter what. And it causes you to do some crazy things. But just to be transparent, it wasn't that long after this that a third organization ended up having in their newsletter a devotional that went to this, and it ended up actually being a third organization that did it. And I can tell you that my response initially was, they're using our verse. And it was at that time that a colleague said, Peter, you've got a giant log in your eye. Let's work on that before we go and address that with the others. But there's something in us that when we subscribe to a worldview of scarcity, it causes us to be in competition with everyone else. And it causes us to do some very silly decisions. But I believe that there is an antidote. There is a different approach. There is an alternative. And I believe that we can see this across sectors and across industries, but perhaps nowhere is it easier to subscribe to a worldview of scarcity than when it comes to funding. In a very real way, it can feel like there's not enough. And in a very real way, it can feel like resources are always constrained. And I think about Melissa Russell. She heads the fundraising team for the International Justice Mission, a large nonprofit organization. And, you know, she is someone who does not view the world in terms of scarcity. And a few years ago, there actually was something that was taking off across the world, but it was called the Ice Bucket Challenge. And I don't know if any of you participated in it, but it was basically taking a bucket of ice water and pouring it on your head as a way of raising awareness for a disease called ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. And this friend reached out to Melissa when all of this was happening. And it was the friend with a very sincere heart said, I wish that all of that attention was not on ALS, not on the work that they were doing, but I wish all of that attention was for you and the good work that you're doing. Now, again, that's from a good heart. It's feeling like a good place of caring about the organization, but it also is rooted in a worldview of scarcity, that there's not enough awareness to go around. So I wish that that was all for you. But Melissa said she had a different approach. And she said, imagine if your child was suffering with this disease, and for the first time in your life, you felt that people saw and were paying attention. Imagine how good that would feel. She said, let's participate in that. Let's join in on that. And then she said something that really struck. She said, I believe in a God who took 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed the multitudes. I do not believe that God is a God of lack. I believe that God has enough for the work that he has called us to do. And the best part of that story is not only did Jesus feed the multitudes, but then there was a basket full of leftovers, one for every disciple, as if it was a giant exclamation point on the fact that God has enough. And if we're going to be competitive about anything, I would love to see us be competitive about how do we make bigger and better statements to raise the overall amount of resources that are available. So I want to pause right there and to just ask again. So that first worldview question, the first question that I think is so helpful and so instructive, but do you believe, in a worldview of abundance or scarcity? And what difference would it make in the way that you lead if you believed that we were not living in a world of scarcity, but a world of abundance? What difference would that make in the way that you lead and serve? Any thoughts? Any thoughts on that? Yeah, thanks, Judith. I would change the world. I love that. Well, great. Well, I would be more generous. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I believe we're in a world of scarcity. It always seems that there is less than what is truly needed. Thank you for that honesty. Yeah, thank you, Dora. Yeah, it sure can feel that way, can it? Yeah. Yeah. I would attract more provision from God. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, everyone has the opportunity to do better if we're not in competition with others. Yeah, that's good. It's good. I know it can feel that way, but I really do believe the words that I heard once, but God's work done in God's way will not lack God's supply. That it might mean changing plans, but I really have come to believe that there is enough. Yeah, good. So that was that first piece, the end of greed and self-centeredness. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. 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 If we no longer felt like we had to fight over that limited piece. Yeah, that's good. So that was the first thing that we found. And again, I'm just reporting back. These are not things that we came up with. These are things that we heard from the most generous and open-handed leaders across a variety of industries. So that first worldview question is, do we believe that we live in a world of abundance or scarcity? And that changes everything. The second worldview question that we found is, do we believe that our primary loyalty is to our brand, our club, our group, our tribe? Or do we believe that our primary loyalty is to a bigger and broader agenda, the kingdom? And it's in this context that I think about every single one of us, whether it's a LinkedIn profile or whether it's a presentation that we give, we all have our logos. And I think this was said in the chat roll earlier, not only do we have our logos, we have our egos. And I believe egos and logos can get in the way of the type of impact that we want to have. It is so easy for us to think no further than the brand, than the organization that we are working for. And I was in Cape Town, and I've seen this modeled on the other extreme though. But I was in Cape Town, it was about a decade ago, and I was working on a book called Mission Drift. And while we were there, we had the opportunity to meet with a variety of leaders, but there was one leader in particular that I really wanted to have a conversation with. And the conference had ended, and I was at the airport, and then I saw Wes Stafford. He was the leader at the time of Compassion International, and a large organization that is doing all kinds of good work in a variety of countries. And I was so curious. I wanted to just ask him a couple questions. So I went up to him in the airport, and I will never forget his response. He was so kind. And I'm sure he was tired from the event. He had just given a big speech, and yet he was so kind. He ended up pulling out a seat. I was able to sit down, and I was able to have this conversation and interview with him. And then when he got back to the United States, he followed up by sending me other materials that he thought would be helpful. And I got this distinct impression that it was almost like him helping me was part of his mission. Even though our logos were different, we were working with two rival organizations, and yet he went above and beyond in extending kindness and help at a time that I so desperately needed it as we were doing this research. And I came to believe that Wes is someone who believes that his mission is not to advance a NGO. He has a higher calling. And as Matthew 6:33 says, he's to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And what that means is seeking first. That means that your organization, that is a subordinate calling. That is subordinate to something that is more important, that kingdom first agenda. And when we have that, that changes the way that we interact. So I love thinking about two ideas and putting them on a simple chart 2 by 2. But I think for all of us, this is a dynamic way of living. The question is, are we going to be living today where our focus is on our organization, our club, or are we going to be invited into a bigger mission, a bigger calling that includes our work, but it includes many others as well? And are we going to be able to do it from a posture of scarcity? There's not enough. Or are we going to be able to live into a posture of abundance? And so if we are focused on our club, our organization, and we believe in a worldview of scarcity, that there's not enough, that more than anything else draws the focus inward. It causes us to shut off to others. And I believe this inward focus leads to a level of unhealthy narcissism that we are unable or unwilling to think beyond ourselves. I do not believe that is where real impact or health is found. But it's also possible for us to believe in a world of abundance, but to think it's all for our organization. So I call this the hoarder category, those that try to grab everything that they can, but think that it is all for them. It's all for us, and they don't think beyond the bounds of their organization. But it's also possible to have a kingdom mentality, but to believe that there's just not enough. I see what's happening, but when there's not enough, it leads to a posture and position of envy. We see the success of others, and it might be interesting for all of us to do a little bit of introspection and to say, when we see others succeed, what happens in our heart? Are we the first one to stand up and cheer? Or is there something in us that causes a twinge of envy on that? And that might be, it might be rooted in this belief that that we want to participate in something bigger, but we don't believe that there's enough. But I think the real transformative work that's happening in our world, I think the real exciting work is in this quadrant where we believe in a mission beyond our mission, and we believe that there's enough for what God has called us to do. I believe that is where real generosity and real impact is happening. I was speaking with an executive of a foundation, and he said something crazy. He told me a story how there were 3 different organizations that were doing Bible translation, and they were doing the Bible translation for the same language, for the same people group, and they felt like they were in competition with each other, which is crazy because that is a unwise use of resources. Having 3 organizations going after the same translation for the same people group within the same timeline, that doesn't seem to make sense. So they started saying, what would it look like if instead of focusing on our organization, what if we created a bigger mission and said, how long will it take until we see the Bible translated into every language for every people on earth? And when they started this project, they believed that that was going to be done by the year 2150. But the organizations that were involved in Bible translation said, we're going to meet together every month. We're going to share staff. We're going to divide so that we're not doing this replication again. We're going to divide so that we can do this more. We're going to share staff, and we're going to do joint events. We're going to increase this. And guess what? instead of seeing that project completed by the year 2150, they are now on track to see that accomplished by the year 2033. They took 117 years off the pace of progress because they were willing to root for their rival. They were willing to come together and share. They were willing to think about something that extended beyond just their quarterly goals or strategic plans, and instead have a bigger vision. And the result of that is 117 years that they were able to take off of that pace of progress that I find absolutely incredible. But it's not just in Bible translation. There's a new movement that's happening among the clean water space, and a movement that's bringing together a global consortium, trying to open source information and saying that we're not trying to just build one organization. We're trying to see that everyone on earth has access to clean water. And they're tracking that, and it is going down. And they believe that that goal is going to be accomplished within their lifetime. We're also seeing this in refugee resettlement. After the Taliban retook Afghanistan, there were a lot of individuals that had to flee as refugees. And in certain parts of the country, it's been so fantastic to see not just an organization pop up, but the way in which organizations are joining together to say everyone that comes should be warmly welcomed. And so they are together creating a goal that requires organization to each bring their area of expertise, but to do this work together. And we're seeing this in poverty alleviation, the place where I spend my time. But instead of just trying to build an organization, there is more open sourcing of information, sharing what we're learning, sharing and able to accomplish more together, because it is no longer just about an organization's goals, but it's about how do we make sure that poverty in our world and in our lifetime is dramatically reduced. And so I want to just pause a little bit here again and say, what would that look like for you? Or what are those organizations? What are those approaches that you see living out in that kingdom and abundance mentality? Are there any examples that you can think of places where you're seeing that being lived out, of the real expanded impact because organizations are coming together? Yeah, thanks, Dora. Churches, that's so great. I love seeing that. And in a very literal way, that is seeing the prayer that Jesus prayed in John 17 come true. That's so good. Thank you. Any other places that you have seen this or are seeing this? I have a little bit of a scrapbook where I love collecting examples. And Judith, not so many examples. That's why we're having this. We need more examples of where we see this. We need more of these types. Climate change activists. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good. Bars, they do it better than churches, especially here in Uganda. Oh, that is a sober critique when we are being upstaged by bars in creative ways of coming together. Yeah. Where else are you seeing this? Political parties against a common opponent. Yeah. In the media. Yeah, it's powerful, isn't it? It can be used for good or for ill, can it? In terms of bringing people together. Right. Well, good. Well, let me give you a couple final thoughts. Charity movements. Yeah, thank you. Let me give you a few final thoughts. And then I'd love just to open it up to go wherever you would like to go in our remaining time together. But I really, Judith, your lines jumps out to me. Not so many examples. And if we are seeing more from bars than we are from churches and ministries and followers, I think we've got room for improvement as well. Yeah, Watoto, social handles. So here's my suggestion. Here's my challenge. It's not just a suggestion, but here's my challenge. What can you do to root for your rival? What can you do to model, to embody a different type of approach? And if indeed these are few and far between, what can we do to lead in a more collaborative, to lead in a more generous, to lead in a more open-handed way? And I want to give you some practical ways that I think we can grow in this. And my hope would be that you would take just one of these and you would do something different within the next 24 hours as you think about growing into a more collaborative or open-handed leader. But the first one is this: time. I find that it is impossible to root for your rivals. It is impossible to pursue collaboration and postures of partnership if you do not prioritize spending time together. So here's my simple challenge. Is there anyone, if you're at a church, is there any one that would look at you and say, you know what, that church is your competition, or that other organization, or that other leader? And even if it's an internal leader within the organization, if there's someone that you feel that twinge of jealousy or rivalry or competition, spend time, have tea, have coffee, have time together, and have the simple agenda to get to know them and to ask a question: how can I help? How can I help? How can I help? Prioritize time in spending time with those that the world would look as your competitor. And relatedly, is there any information that you have that might be helpful to others? Is there anyone that you might have information and it might be helpful to others? So just as one simple example, with Hope International, I don't believe that we exist just to build an organization. I think we are part of a bigger mission, a bigger calling. And so we put everything online for free for any other organization that would like it. All of our manuals, all of our trainings, all of our board, anything that we have that might be helpful to others, we just wanted to open source it. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. Is there anything that is in your hands that might be helpful to others? And what would happen if we just open sourced more information? So if you want to see an example of what that looks like, or if there's anything that Hope International has that might be helpful to you, you can go to hopeinternational.org/resources, and I can include that in the chat later on if that's helpful. But that's a simple place that we just wanted to say we want to be a blessing to others. If we can help anyone, and this is really just replicating what has been modeled to us. When I joined Hope International, we didn't have an employee manual, and we needed to have an employee manual. So a friend sent theirs to me and said, Peter, just take it, do whatever you want. So using Microsoft Word, I just did find, replace the name of his organization and replaced it with Hope International. And within 30 seconds, we had an employee manual on that. And think of the hours that were saved on that. Think of the time that was saved on that, because he had done all of the legal work and all of that in a way that just was, open-handed and generous and kind and had an impact. The third area that I think about is language. What if the next time someone asked, how are you different from Hope Resurrection Ministries? Instead of saying, how are you different? What if the question was, what are you doing together? That's a better question. And what if in our language, we refused to use language that would subtly undermine someone else to lift us up? What if we no longer answered a question of how are you better or bigger or wiser or more innovative or having a bigger impact? What if we no longer took the bait and changed the question to say, what I'd really like to talk about is the good work that they're doing and the great way that we are supporting each other? That would send a powerful message. And then the next one is platform. We all have platforms, whether it is a platform of social media or whether it's a platform in terms of events. We all have platforms. And what would happen if instead of just using our platform to promote ourselves, our work, our ministries, what if instead we thought about having a posture of generosity where periodically we would generously get out of the way and share that platform with others? And now getting even crazier. And what would happen if we started being more generous with our money to those rival organizations? When we wrote the book, Rooting for Rivals, we were able to have the great joy of giving away the proceeds, and we gave it away in a specific way. We gave the money away to the other organizations that are in our space. And I believe that was some of the most impactful philanthropy that I've ever been a part of, because it sent a message. It beyond my words, it communicated, we are in this together. What would happen if we started being generous, even to those organizations that the world looks at and says, you are the competition? And then similarly, what would happen if we would be more generous with our prayers? It is relatively easy for me to pray for the needs that I have. It is relatively easy to remember those in prayer, but I think it takes intentionality to pray for God's favor, to pray for God's blessing, to pray for the leadership of the organizations that are similar to Hope International. But I know what happens in that. I believe that those are incredible things that do bless others, but it also shapes our heart, and it allows us to grow into more open-handed, more of leaders that are in alignment with the prayer that Jesus had, that we would be brought to complete unity. So the great irony, we talk about rooting for rivals, cheering on our competition. But the great irony is, I think that this sort of an approach, it actually changes the way that we look at those rivals. And I have had the great fun of saying, those are no longer rivals. Those are friends. And I believe friendship in this work, it accelerates impact. And there is much, much, much more joy in the process as well. So I want to close with this, just as the final word here. But the Matthew 5:9 from the Message translation, but it says this: it says, "You're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of compete or fight. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family." And I believe that last line is so important. We are all in God's family. We are in the same family. And that means that we can show what it looks like to no longer compete, but to cooperate, and to do so within the bond of friendship together. So that is my prayer. That is my hope. And Judith, that is what was on my heart to share with all of you today. And yeah, I would love to see where you want to go, if there's any other questions or how you want to handle the discussion at this point. But a great joy to be with all of you.
Okay, questions for Peter. I don't know, Peter, if you remember, but you actually shared a manual with me about board members. I didn't know what to do about board members. So I emailed you, say, oh, I have a mentor. Peter, what do you do with board members? It's like, Judy gets all this. And I'm like, do they have like a copyright? Am I supposed to? So I've been watching you. You've been actually living your message. We are really very grateful. We've had pastors, most of the people online are pastors. Have you had statements like, he stole my sheep, he stole my muzungu or my sponsors? How do you deal with all that? That's my question. If your rivals have stolen your sheep or your sponsors, what do we do? Yeah, thanks, Judith. Yeah, and you know, I think there's two things. One is a question of mathematics. So my kids are in school now, and you know, I love helping them with their homework on that and mathematics. But I've got a simple math problem for you, Judith. So I'm going to bring you back to primary school, and I've got a simple math problem. If there are two churches and they each have 100 people,
how many total people are active in the churches?
Okay, say that again. Two churches.
Two churches each have 100. And so, yeah, exactly. 200, 200 exactly.
Mhm.
Now, what happens if 5 of those individuals go from one church to the other? How many people?
205 on one.
It's the same people. So
Yes,
now one
on
has
one group.
it still is 200.
Yes, sir.
And
Yes, sir.
I think for me, the question that I'm much more interested in is, instead of looking at shifting between churches, what does it look like to grow that number? what does it look like? And so I think that, to me, is like the animating question. And what that does is it does 2 things. One is it creates a posture of generosity. If someone goes to another church, but then they're able to invite more people in, and they're able to, it's actually a better spot for them, and they're getting fed, and they're like, if that results in them inviting 2 new people in, I've got to celebrate that, because that is more people in the aggregate, because the cumulative number, I believe, matters more than just the aggregate number of one. So that is one area. But then the second thing is, if we are in relationship, I think that allows us to then address, and if it is a gracious, like, of this person is going to be a better fit in your church, so I bless you in that. I bless them as there. But if it is like a covert, as I said earlier, is your church boring? Come to mine. That has no place in, that is not rooting for your rivals. That is undermining them. That is harming the credibility and the witness. And if you're in relationship, it allows you to go directly to that person, as Matthew 18 says, and say, can I tell you, I know that we are in this mission together, but it didn't really feel like it in this instance. And so I think there's an opportunity in that to both do 2 things. One is to celebrate if it really is expanding the kingdom and is better for their discipleship and better for their outreach, and to challenge it if it's done in a way that actually is hurting the shared mission, credibility, and witness of the church, the picture of unity in that as well. So yeah, that's what I would think of, but it is easier to say than to do. My father is a pastor, and I have seen that in both some wonderful ways and some ways that I know hurt pretty deeply as well.
Dora is asking, talk about business, like the example of McDonald's. You have an employee who goes and starts the same business next door and was once your employee. What do? Do you go and give them more money to outrun you? Do you move? Yeah. What do you do?
Yeah, the craziest thing. There are so many great examples of what this looks like, but I think about an example with a business in California, and the opening line of their sales manual is this. It says, your competitor is your ally. And the reason that they say that is because they're trying to create a new sector. And so they say anything that contributes to building this sector is going to be good for all of us. The classic line of the rising tide lifts all boats. They believe that. And so it sharpens them. And as crazy as it sounds, there are some individuals that I have seen that actually have provided support to their competitors, because they know that that will make them better and make the sector advance faster on that. So I do think these principles hold even in some places that you might not think of it. But one of the other kind of examples that we've seen that I just love in it was when you no longer, I have one friend that said, I see everything no longer as win-lose, meaning like, I have to win, and the only way for me to win is for you to lose. And instead, he says, I just have come to see that it's win-win. And if you look at the GDP of most countries, you see that it continues to rise. And oftentimes, to a very real way, the pie gets bigger on that. And so he said, I see it as a win-win. And what that does for him is it means that he no longer tries to extract every penny of value out. It means he no longer feels like he has to do everything possible to squeeze out every good, and instead can go in with a long-term time horizon. And I just was reading a study from a business school that showed this, that those leaders that actually believe that it's possible to have a win-win, that not everything is I win, the only way I win is if you lose, those are the healthiest organizations. Those are the ones that actually have a much bigger and outsized impact. So I believe these principles hold. They might be tweaked a little bit, but I still think a posture of kindness, a picture of generosity, a picture where I care about the organization that I work, but I also care about you. I think that those are the types of organizations that actually do achieve long-term health and vibrancy.
What if the other person, Trevor is asking, what if the other person is not willing to play? You are generous, you want to be nice to them, they are not willing. Maybe because it says mistrust or fear. What do you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a very real way that you are not able to control the actions or reactions of anyone else. So there is a little bit, I love what Roman says, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. There are certain things that are out of our control. And if people don't want to, you can't force them. You can't figure out. But at the same time, you can do what is contingent upon you, which is to, Jesus says it pretty strongly. He said, pray for your enemies, like bless and do not curse. Like he gives us some crazy high standard of what it looks like. So I think our responsibility is, have we done everything possible to bless and not curse, to show kindness and generosity, not internal envy or hoarding? And I think it's in those places that we can. Yeah. Sometimes there's the response that we would like. Sometimes it's not. But as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone.
Yes, yes. Everybody who else has a question, sometimes you really want to share and be generous, but the other person but there's nothing to give. Are you assuming that we all have something to give? Like the question of Exodus, or is there a situation where I say, I love you people, I wish you the best, but I have nothing to share?
Oh, I think that everyone has something to give and everyone has something that they need to receive. And certainly, I think we have to broaden the definition of what it means to give. I have been given some of the biggest gifts of my life that have no financial value. They are words from my kids of, Dad, I love you. Oh man, that is a gift. When I get to hear that from my kids, I appreciate you. Those things. So I think everyone has something to give. And I would broaden the definition beyond the material realm to think about what it is that we have to give to each other. Yeah, a word aptly spoken, a word spoken in season. It's like gold.
If you're a pastor here, please ask Peter a question. If you've lost sheep or you've lost a mzungu or anyone, please, I want to give you chance to ask Peter. Peter, I know you were not talking about mission drift, but I want to take you there for a second, because sometimes even if we try to connect to what you're saying, I don't want to be too involved in my being generous to my rivals and lose my identity. Am I losing focus if I'm in the name of being too generous to these people?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting, Judith. I actually think there's a connection between the two kind of topics. And I think rooting for rivals is downstream from knowing our mission. right? So when we know our mission, when we know who we are, when we know what we're about, when we have our area of expertise and focus and know what we're about, then when someone comes in and says, I would really like to partner with you in something that is outside of that area, we can say, I want to encourage you. I will pray for you right now. But that's outside of who we are and what God has brought us to do. So it allows us to know, as part of the discernment process, what to say yes to and what to say no to. So I think there is a connection there as well. And then I think the practical piece is it a distraction to our mission, or is it an aid to our mission? I think most of the time when we are in relationship with others, we are learning together, we are growing together, we are sharing best practices. And I think that learning and innovation are actually best accomplished with others. It's really interesting. If you look at the kind of areas of the world that have had accelerated development, almost always they happen at the crossroads. So if you look back at Uganda's history and you could map the trade routes, where individuals coming from, you will find centers of innovation where those trade routes overlapped, because you had people passing through, bringing ideas, bringing new ways of doing something. And that typically is where innovation happens faster. And isn't it crazy sometimes with even ministries and churches that we think the way to really advance our mission is by retreating and by not being in relationship? No, we are missing out on the gift of learning and growing together and saying, this is what I'm trying. What are you trying? And how did you solve this problem? And tell me more. I believe that's the opportunity for us to advance our mission in a way that you might think it's maybe counterintuitive, but the more we give, the more we receive, oftentimes as well.
Okay, someone is asking if your chat, let's go back to your chat, the Kingdom Club. Say, please share about the kingdom mentality as opposed to being a club.
Yeah. And I don't know if the words are the right ones, if anyone has better words, but I was really trying to get at the difference between, do I believe, just on a very personal way, that my mission is synonymous with Hope International? Meaning that if someone comes to me and says, this would be best for not Hope International, but this would be best for the global church to engage in poverty alleviation, am I going to say yes to that? So maybe on a practical level, there's another organization that is doing something similar, and we could really help them. We could really help them with a specific area or a staff member to go spend time, and there's no benefit to Hope International directly. Are we willing to do that? And I would say the answer is yes, if we believe that our mission is not just confined to building an organization, but it's a mission that is bigger. So an example would be Bible translation. Do you believe the organizations that participate that it is just about them and their organization, or is it trying to say, let's do everything possible to, as quickly as possible, ensure that the Bible is translated into every language? That is a mission that is bigger than the mission of their particular organization. So I think that to me is the piece that I have settled in my heart, that I am so thankful to work for this organization, Hope International. But if there ever is a time that I feel a conflict between what is best for Hope International and what is going to be best for the witness of Jesus Christ in our world, that's what I'm going to choose. I'm going to choose the bigger mission than just the smaller piece that the organization that I work for plays. So that's what I was trying to unpack a little bit in kingdom versus club.
Mm-hmm. Knowing that we are not building our small kingdoms.
That's right.
But we are called to a universal church, a universal call.
That's right.
Which is sometimes very hard. You know, you find that church, there's a church here next door, another church. I'm in Tulsa, We have so many churches, one church next to another, that you wonder, why didn't they just come together and make one big church?
Yeah.
But if your mission you think is completely different and you should start your own church, at least be generous doing it or be kind.
That's right.
I think that's what Peter is saying. Yeah. Peter, what have you overcome as a leader in even with working with rivals? What has been your hardest moment? I know you've had to give money to rivals. And I don't know even how that looks like, to say, oh, we are campaigning for the money, but let's write a check to the next church. What has been the most hard thing for you to overcome?
Oh, yeah, I think about what's been the most difficult thing to overcome this week, because this is a dynamic piece. I know that my default posture is to slip into scarcity and club thinking. I know that is my tendency. So constantly trying to work. I think the piece for me that is hardest is to truly celebrate the victories of others when I feel like it comes at our expense. So, we know there's 5 organizations that applied for funding from this one foundation, and they got it and we didn't. Am I willing to stand up and be the first one to cheer and to congratulate them and to wish them well as they expand their programs? That is not always my default posture. The second one that is difficult is when there are incredibly talented staff members of Hope International and they go to another organization where their skills can be an even better fit. Do I send them off with blessing, or do I say, oh, I can't believe they're leaving? And so I think that those are the areas that I am feeling it. And I want to keep growing in this, to truly be open-handed and generous and collaborative, and remember that we are part of the same family.
And I think that's what Timothy is saying we are not yet disciples. We are working on it. We are growing. So no one is there yet, but Timothy is saying, are we growing, or are we not just disciples? Are we like cancelled? Have we failed completely? Or is there hope for us, even if we haven't cheered for our rivals? That's a question.
Judith, I work for Hope International. There is always hope. I believe there is always hope. And I would say that's why I really wanted to figure out the question about, like, in the ending, just do one thing. If you realize that you're not all the way there, do one thing. Take those small steps, spend time, start praying, like do things that are going to form your own heart in becoming more collaborative, more generous, more likely to root for your rival. So yeah, I would say take those small steps. And if you take enough small steps, you can cover a great distance.
Man, I don't want to clap for you. Dora, can you talk? You asked so many questions. So I want you to be the one to thank our speaker before I know he's a very busy man. Peter, thank you so much for creating the time. We are so honored. We are so blessed. And I don't know if Dora can talk. We are giving her God stuff for asking so many questions by being the... Okay, what do you have to say to Peter before he jumps off?
Ndifuza kugushimira cyane kubera inyigisho waduhaye, ukuntu witanze, ukuntu watwigishije uburyo bwo gutekereza butandukanye n'ubw'isi turimo imeze, gukunda abatwanga, gufatanya no gushyira imbere ubwami bw'Imana kuruta gushyira imbere ubwami bwacu n'ibyo twifuza. Ndumva ari ibintu byo gutekerezaho. Watwaguye mu bitekerezo, kandi hari ikintu gishya njyewe nize nk'umuntu. Ubwami bw'Imana burahari, kandi hari uburyo bwa buri munsi twabaho tubuteza imbere, dufatanya tukaba umubiri wa Kristo, ab'isi nabo babona bakifuza bagakunda. Wakoze cyane, nagukunze n'ubwa mbere nkubonye, ariko nari umukiriya w'urwego kandi nzi uruhare wagizemo. Imana iguhe umugisha.
Murakoze cyane Dora, ndumva neza. Murakoze cyane, Imana iguhe umugisha.
Amen, amen. There are other Rwandese who are in hiding, but what Dora was saying is that she was either client or beneficiary of Peter's work in Rwanda.
Both.
Both a client and a beneficiary of his work. So she's saying thank you. Thank you. Who is in Uganda or Kenya? We have someone in Turkey, in the UK, here in the US, who wants to say thank you, Peter, before he jumps off. That was all Dora said, Dennis. That was all the interpretation. Before he can jump off. Dennis, what are you saying? That is our Turkey man location. What do you think about everyone. Peter?
Thank you so much, Peter, for the session just from in. I just bless God that I joined today. I missed last time. But Pastor Judith.
Yes, sir.
How wish we would bring everyone on board, because these are kinds of lessons that we need. You talked of mushrooming churches. 500 meters, you meet a church. 500 meters, you meet a church. By the time I left Kampala, in Ukamuwacha alone, where I am based, we had over 200 churches within there. And that is very important. Why don't we unite? Why don't we put the visions together and we grow the body of Christ other than competing and instead of collaborating? That was very important. I have nothing much to throw to your earshoots, but to just thank everyone and whoever invited me into this winning teachings. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much, Pastor Judith. I would beg to hang in all the time that this session goes on air. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Peter, thank you. Thank you. We are going to release Peter, but thank you, everybody. I know everyone is saying, Peter, come back anytime.
Yes.
Anytime.
This is a joy, and may God bless you. A privilege to spend this time. Thank you for the invitation and great joy. So may God bless all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bless you. Thank you. We'll be in touch. We'll be in touch. And Godfrey says hi. He's here in hiding. But he's here.
Hi, Peter.
Greetings to Godfrey as well. Yeah. Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody. That was a good class. Please put your comments in the WhatsApp. Let's see let us know how Peter did or how we can best. He said if you want the materials from Hope, he's willing to share. So let us know what you need.